I parked my RV in my driveway for a weekend trip, and what happened next was something I'll never forget. The moment I stepped outside, I heard the sound of honking. At first, I thought it was someone just driving by, but when I looked over, I saw her, Karen, one of my neighbors. Her face was twisted in anger as she sat in her car, eyes locked on me. I waved, thinking she might just be having a bad day, but I should have known it wasn't that simple. Karen had always been the type of neighbor to complain about anything that didn't fit her idea of what the neighborhood should be. But this time, it was my RV that was causing her grief. I never thought parking it in my own driveway would set off such a chain of events, but here I was, facing a problem I never imagined. She rolled down her window and shouted, "You can't park that thing here. It's blocking the street." Her voice had a shrill tone that made me cringe, and I knew this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. The RV was parked in my own driveway, well off the road, so I wasn't sure what she was talking about. But there was no mistaking the anger in her eyes. I tried to explain that it wasn't blocking anyone's way and that I was just preparing for a weekend trip. That's when she dropped the bomb. "I'm calling the HOA. They'll make sure you move it. It's against the rules to have that thing here." I was taken aback. I had no idea the HOA had any restrictions on parking RVs in driveways. I knew they had rules about lawns and fences, but this was a whole new level. Karen, however, seemed to think that she was the enforcer of every single rule in the neighborhood. I told her to go ahead and call the HOA, thinking she might be overreacting. But I could tell from her smug expression that she wasn't going to let this go easily. As she pulled out her phone and began dialing, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What had started as a simple weekend getaway was now turning into a battle of wills with my entitled neighbor. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide if I should just move the RV to avoid more trouble, but I couldn't back down. This was my property, and I had every right to park my RV in my own driveway. If I let her walk all over me now, who knew what she would come up with next? I was getting ready for a confrontation, but little did I know, this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't just going to leave it at a phone call. She was about to escalate this situation in a way I never expected. Karen didn't waste any time. The moment she finished her phone call, she stomped up to my door, her face a mask of fury. I opened it, and before I could even say a word, she started right in. "You think you can park that oversized eyesore in front of your house without consequences? This isn't a campground," she shouted. "I'm calling a tow truck, and you're going to pay for this." I was taken aback, but I held my ground. "Karen, I'm parked in my own driveway, and it's well within my rights to park my RV here. There's no law saying I can't do that." Her eyes narrowed. "You may think you know the law, but you don't know the HOA. They'll make sure that thing's gone before the day is over." She pointed to the phone in her hand. "The HOA already knows about this. You're in big trouble." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was taking this to the next level, but what really got me was the sheer confidence in her voice. It was clear that she thought she could control everything in the neighborhood, even down to my own driveway. I tried to keep my cool, explaining that I was just taking a quick weekend trip, but it was like talking to a brick wall. She wasn't hearing any of it. Instead, she began making calls, clearly hoping to rally the HOA into her corner. But Karen wasn't done yet. No, she wasn't satisfied with just making a call. She decided to take it a step further by calling a tow truck to remove my RV from my own driveway. I watched, stunned, as she stood there, gesturing for the tow truck to come and pick up my RV. I had parked it legally, and yet here she was, trying to have it towed simply because it upset her sense of order. It wasn't just the fact that she was being unreasonable, it was the sheer audacity of it all. To think that someone could just take control of a situation like this, completely disregarding my rights, made me furious. I immediately called my friend who worked in legal services. "What can I do?" Can she really have my RV towed from my property? I asked, my voice shaky. He assured me that no one could tow my vehicle from my property without a valid reason, and certainly not just because a neighbor didn't like the way it looked. The HOA had no authority over my driveway, and Karen had no right to demand a tow. Feeling a little more confident, I decided to stand my ground. Karen, I said, walking out to meet her, you can't just have my RV towed. I'm within my rights to park it here, and I've called the police to make sure no one removes it. Karen's eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in her face. But then she quickly regained her composure and muttered something under her breath. Fine, she sneered, but this isn't over. As she walked away, I knew she wasn't going to let it rest. But I also knew that I had done nothing wrong, and I was ready to take this fight as far as I needed to. The following morning, I woke up to a feeling of dread. I knew Karen wasn't the type to give up easily, and I had a feeling she was about to take things even further. Sure enough, by the time I finished breakfast, I noticed something odd. A letter had been slipped under my door. I picked it up and saw the familiar logo of the HOA at the top. My heart sank as I opened it and read through the contents. The HOA had received complaints about my RV being parked in my driveway, and they were demanding that I move it immediately or face a fine. The letter went on to state that if I didn't comply, the HOA would send a tow truck to remove my RV, just as Karen had threatened. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The HOA had actually sided with Karen without even bothering to check the situation for themselves. They didn't care that I had parked the RV legally in my own driveway. The letter felt like a direct attack on my rights, and it was clear they were just doing Karen's bidding. I felt furious, betrayed, and helpless all at once. I immediately grabbed my phone and called the HOA's office. The receptionist answered with a polite tone, but I could tell there was no sense of urgency in her voice. I explained my situation, but her response was anything but reassuring. Unfortunately, once the complaint is filed, we have to act on it, she said. You'll need to move the RV by the end of the week, or there will be consequences. At that moment, I knew the HOA wasn't going to be any help. It didn't matter that I was right. The HOA, just like Karen, seemed more concerned with maintaining their vision of the neighborhood than respecting the rights of homeowners. Determined not to let this go any further, I decided to take action. I reached out to a local attorney who specialized in property rights. She listened patiently as I explained the situation and assured me that the HOA had no legal grounds to tow my RV or fine me. You're well within your rights to park in your own driveway, she said. The HOA can't impose restrictions on personal property like that. If they try to take further action, you can fight this in court. Her words gave me a sense of relief, but I knew this battle was far from over. The next day, I drove down to the HOA office with a plan. I wasn't just going to back down. I was going to stand up for my rights and make sure they understood they couldn't bully me into submission. When I arrived at the office, I was greeted by a receptionist who directed me to a meeting room. A few moments later, the board members walked in, including Karen, of course. She had that smug expression on her face, like she had already won. But I wasn't intimidated. I'm here because I've received complaints about my RV, I said, standing tall in front of the board. And I want to make it clear that I have every right to park it in my driveway. The HOA has no jurisdiction over my property in this regard, and I'm not going to be bullied into moving my RV. Karen scoffed. You're causing chaos in this neighborhood, she said. You're making it look like a trailer park. I shook my head. Karen, this is my property, and I'm not going to let you or the HOA dictate how I use it. I've spoken with an attorney, and I know my rights. The board members looked at each other, murmuring. Some seemed unsure about the situation, while others clearly wanted to avoid a confrontation. Karen, however, wasn't backing down. She continued to argue, but I held my ground. After what felt like hours of back and forth, the board finally realized that they had no real legal basis for forcing me to move my RV. They reluctantly agreed that I had the right to park it on my property. Karen wasn't pleased, but at least for now, I had one. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wouldn't let go that easily, and the HOA was still likely to be a problem in the future. I left the meeting feeling victorious but with a lingering sense that I hadn't seen the last of Karen's attempts to control my life. A few days after the meeting, things seemed to settle down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. Karen had gone quiet, but I knew she wasn't the type to let things slide without a final attempt at revenge. As if on cue, I received another letter from the HOA. The letter was short, but its implications were anything but. The HOA was now threatening legal action if I didn't move my RV by the end of the week. They claimed that there had been further complaints from other neighbors who were disturbed by my RV and that the matter had now been escalated. They even included a reminder about the neighborhood's rules regarding parking, even though none of those rules applied to me parking in my own driveway. I was furious. This time, I knew it was Karen's doing. She had managed to rally a few of the other residents who were more than happy to complain about anything that didn't fit their idea of a perfect neighborhood. The HOA was clearly acting as her puppet, and it felt like they were just trying to wear me down, hoping I'd eventually cave in. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I called my lawyer immediately and forwarded the letter. "They're trying to intimidate me again," I told her, my voice tight with anger. "Don't worry," she said calmly. "We've got this. I'll draft a formal response to the HOA, outlining your rights and making it clear that they can't force you to move your RV without a legitimate legal reason. We'll also include a reminder that if they continue harassing you, you'll take legal action for harassment." That sounded like exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I received a call from my lawyer's office. She had already sent a strongly worded letter to the HOA, demanding that they cease and desist their actions. In the letter, she explained that I had the legal right to park my RV in my driveway and that their repeated harassment could result in a lawsuit for emotional distress and harassment. I felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone was fighting for me. But just as I was beginning to feel confident, I received a call from Karen herself. Her voice was dripping with frustration. "I've had enough of you. You think you can just do whatever you want in this neighborhood? Well, I'm not going to let you get away with this," she yelled into the phone. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Karen, you're harassing me, and you know it. The HOA is harassing me, and you're all wrong. I've done nothing wrong, and I'm not going to let you continue bullying me. If you try anything else, I will take legal action." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Karen's voice came through, much quieter, but still filled with venom. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." And with that, she hung up. I had been prepared for Karen to escalate things, but I didn't realize just how far she would go. The HOA, too, was stubbornly persistent. Even after my lawyer sent the letter, the HOA sent another notice, this time even more threatening than before. They were pushing for a fine, saying I was violating some vague community standard that they hadn't specified. It was clear that they weren't going to stop without a fight. I wasn't about to back down. I called my lawyer again, determined to end this once and for all. "We're going to take this all the way. If the HOA insists on continuing this fight, I'm ready for a full legal battle." My lawyer agreed. "We'll file a formal complaint if they don't back down. They can't keep doing this without a real legal reason. You're in the right, and we'll make sure they know it." A week later, I received a phone call that I had been both dreading and anticipating. The HOA wanted to settle the matter once and for all, and they were now requesting a formal meeting. This time, it wasn't just Karen involved, several board members would be there to discuss the ongoing RV situation. I felt a sense of nervous excitement. On the one hand, this could finally put the issue to rest, but on the other hand, I knew Karen would be there, ready to stir up trouble. Still, I was determined to walk into this meeting with everything I had, the legal advice, the formal letter from my lawyer, and the knowledge that I was in the right. The day of the meeting came, and I was ready. I wore a simple but professional outfit and carried all my documents neatly organized in a folder. As I entered the HOA office, the atmosphere was tense. Karen was already seated at the front of the room, her arms crossed and a look of determination on her face. She glared at me as I walked in, but I didn't flinch. I was ready to stand my ground. The meeting began with the HOA board president addressing the issue at hand. He outlined the complaints from Karen and a few of the other neighbors who had been upset by my RV, emphasizing that it was a nuisance to the neighborhood. He went on to say that the HOA had received numerous complaints about the unsightly appearance of the RV and how it was impacting property values. I felt my blood pressure rise, but I kept my cool. The board president then asked me to explain my side of the story. I stood up and calmly began explaining that I had parked the RV in my own driveway, which was perfectly legal. I emphasized that the HOA had no jurisdiction over my property in this matter. I also pointed out that the neighborhood was not a private gated community with strict parking rules, it was a collection of individual homes, and each homeowner had the right to use their property as they saw fit. Karen immediately interrupted, her voice sharp. "You're causing a disruption to this community. No one else has an RV parked on their property like that. It's a mess, and it's devaluing our homes," she shouted. I didn't let her get under my skin. "Karen, it's my property, and I've followed the law. There's nothing in the HOA rules that says I can't park my RV here. I've consulted with an attorney, and I know my rights. I'm not going to back down just because you don't like it." There was a long silence in the room. The other board members exchanged glances, clearly unsure of how to proceed. Karen, on the other hand, was visibly frustrated, but she didn't have a strong argument to back her up. The more I spoke, the more the other members seemed to soften in their stance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the board members spoke up. "I don't think we can continue pushing this issue. The homeowner is within their rights. The RV is parked legally, and we don't have any legal grounds to force its removal." Karen's face turned red with anger. She slammed her hand on the table, clearly furious. "This isn't over," she shouted, but the rest of the room ignored her. They were already moving on, realizing they had no valid argument. The board president cleared his throat. "It seems we have no choice but to respect the homeowner's rights in this case," he said, reluctantly. "The HOA will not pursue any further action regarding the RV." It was over. After weeks of stress, threats, and constant harassment from Karen and the HOA, I had finally won. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, I could breathe easy. Karen stormed out of the room, her face twisted with rage, but I didn't care. I had stood my ground, and I had secured my rights. In the days that followed, things calmed down. Karen didn't approach me again, and the HOA stopped sending threats. I continued to park my RV in my driveway, without fear of it being towed or fined. I had won not just the right to park my RV, but also a hard-fought battle against an entitled neighbor and a stubborn HOA that thought they could push me around. I learned a lot from the experience. It wasn't just about parking an RV in my driveway, it was about standing up for my rights, no matter how many obstacles were thrown in my way. And while Karen may have lost this round, I knew she would never forget that I wasn't someone who would let her push me around.